Aloha. Any students that have had me before have known that it's always been a dream of mine to come into the class on the first day and say, right on the board, Aloha, I'm Mr. Hand. Unfortunately, I can't do that because my last name is not Hand. So I can only say, Aloha, I'm Mr. Evans. And you've signed up for Introduction to Poetry and Drama in the summer term of 2020. So I'll have a more proper aloha quite soon. This is sort of the pre-aloha. The important thing to know right now is that as of right now, you do not have to buy a textbook. We're going to make our own mixtape online, and all the materials will be available online. This is just me saying hi, and a couple words about poetry. Mostly, there's a lot of people that either don't like poetry or are afraid of it. And whether you are not one of those people in the sense that you do like poetry, or you don't like it, but at least you're not afraid of it, you've overcome that initial hurdle. In very brief terms, I would say the reason why a lot of people do not like poetry in America, that is, the United States of America, is usually the way it's taught in school, in lower schools. It's usually taught that there's some secret riddle that you're supposed to find in the poetry, some deep meaning in a poem, and then if you don't find it, you get frustrated and you hate it. Or it's the other extreme. It's sometimes taught that a poem can mean anything. It's anything you want to get out of it. So you could read The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams and say that was about the anguish of the people of Brooklyn when the Brooklyn Dodgers moved to Los Angeles. And that would not be the case. So we'll talk about that more. But I had a friend, Ziamara, for example, who's from Nicaragua, where they don't have that type of attitude about poetry. She always has known that I'm a poet, and she would just say, read me a poem. In the same way, if you had a friend who played music, you would just say, play me a song. If you were all at the beach together on vacation, if you can remember such times. We'll talk about, how all these things that we're doing relate to this moment we're in. Ezra Pound famously said, literature is news that stays news. And poetry especially sometimes can be news that stays news. I've been thinking about that the word copious and coping must come from the same root word. And I'm either too lazy or distracted right now with my days so packed full that I haven't looked it up. But, copious means abundant and plentiful. You think of a cornucopia being a wonderful thing, endless amount of delightful food. And then, of course, coping is when we, butch through a problem. And poetry can do both of those things. In brief, I'll say that on this day, 5 years ago, I was in Salzburg, which is in the country of Austria, which, if you want to do one thing, do not confuse Austria and Australia. Australia is where they have kangaroos, and Austria is where they have Marie Antoinette, who gave the world the pleasures of cake eating, shoes, and bathing. So I was in Salzburg, Austria, 5 years ago today. And that is where they made the movie The Sound of Music. And it's a movie that, if it was a play that musical play that was then made into a movie. They used to show it all the time, like Christmas every year. And I don't know if, I guess my girl cousins were really into that movie, or maybe it was just the ladies of St. Louis King of France Grammar School, one of the two. But it was a huge musical. You know, ask your parents or your auntie or your grandfather, your uncle. And there it was, Salzburg, Austria. It's mountains, you know. The famous song from the movie says the hills are alive with the sound of music. And it just was a place I never, ever thought that I would ever be, in the actual mountains of Salzburg, Austria, coming from the lowlands of New Orleans, Louisiana. The reason I was there is because I had become friends with a lady named Lizzie, who was at a poetry reading. She was basically a friend of a friend, you know, a few years earlier, and then eventually went to visit her in Vienna, where she's from. So because of poetry, there I found myself in the hills or the mountains of Austria. And that's the magic side. That's the muse that we'll talk about. And then there's the other part, the coping part. Poetry can do both of those things, as we'll find out soon. I should mention that The Sound of Music is certainly not one of my favorite movies. And the people of Austria, most of them have never even heard of the movie, which is kind of brilliant. But there is a song in the movie which says, these are a few of my favorite things. And some of the poems we'll be reading are some of the ones that have been my favorites along the way, and then some new ones that I've never read before that we'll all read together. Okay, so this is the pre-Aloha. My name is Mr. Evans. I'll meet you soon online. For now, no. You do not need to buy a textbook, and we'll be talking soon. Aloha.